Okay, let's start. Oh my God, this is wonderful.
Buenos días. ¿Cómo está?
As I spoke in Spanish when I introduced you, what I said is that you are the great decoder of the criminal mind. We have been talking about this for a long time now, but it's true. So my first question would be about Mindhunter and such a brilliant piece of fiction. How did you come up with the idea and why?
Well, it's kind of hard to... Sorry.
Do you want to translate? Yeah,
Sí,
we'll
bueno,
do that.
para empezar vamos a hablar de Mindhunter. Joe es uno de los grandes decodificadores de la mente humana y queríamos saber un poco de dónde surge esta maravillosa obra de ficción, de dónde sale la idea y por qué quiere contar esta historia.
So it's kind of hard to believe, but when I was a kid, one of my friends was murdered by a serial killer, and I think it kind of lit a spark and created an itch I couldn't scratch. So I'd always wanted to write about that subject. And then Charlize Theron, who I'd worked with on a film called The Road, she found this sort of non-fiction memoir by an FBI behavioral scientist, all about his career catching serial killers. And I didn't know how to make it into a show. And I said, well, why don't I just make it all up? Why don't I just invent characters and stories and use this as a bit of research material? Do you want to translate
sure,
before I
sure.
say too much?
Okay, yeah. Pues os parecerá difícil de creer, pero cuando era niño uno de sus amigos murió asesinado por un asesino en serie y eso fue como que despertó una chispa porque tenía ganas de entender por qué había pasado eso y él sentía que quería escribir sobre ello y durante el rodaje trabajando en la película La carretera con Charlize Theron, ella le habló de un libro autobiográfico escrito por un agente del FBI que había dedicado su carrera a entender la mente de los asesinos en serie y entonces intentó darle forma para convertirlo en una obra de ficción, pero no encontraba la manera y al final decidió que la mejor forma era inventárselo todo y utilizar ese libro como una especie de documentación.
Yes, you go now. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, or should I keep going?
Well, just to say that, so the book was brought to me, and everybody was kind of really stuck on this book, and I said, throw the book away, and I'll make up something. But I didn't really realize until later that probably the reason why I was able to do that was because when I was a kid, you know, there were serial killers around, and we were all really fascinated by them, and had kind of borne witness to it a bit. So I just let my imagination go, really, and took stories from the book and met lots of FBI guys and women who caught serial killers. And I've met a few criminals myself over time. So it was kind of fun to just come up with a confection, really, and try and make it look real.
Pues cuando estábamos trabajando en Mindhunter, mucha gente estaba centrado en ese libro, como que se obsesionaron con que teníamos que quedarnos muy pegados al libro, pero yo al final decidí decirles que lo teníamos que olvidar. Y dándole vueltas, creo que por qué me interesa tanto el tema es porque de niño viví esa situación en la que estábamos conviviendo en una época en la que había asesinos en serie y fui testigo de ese hecho. Pero también utilicé mucho mi imaginación y hablé... evidentemente utilicé el libro como base, también hablé con mucha gente, muchos agentes del FBI que habían captado a asesinos en serie y también había conocido a gente a criminales durante mi vida y me pareció muy divertido crear una obra de ficción basado en todo eso.
A moment ago, when we were talking, you mentioned that after wrapping up Mindhunter, you saw Marshlands, La Isla Mínima, and you found certain similarities between Alberto Rodriguez's work and your work. Is that okay? Is that all right?
Yeah, I think it was all written And then we were doing all the, Mindhunter involved 1 million rewrites, and it also involved 1 million people coming in going, what are you doing? That's not going to work. And, it's just two guys talking and investigating horrible serial killings. How's that going to work? And then I found out about Marshland, and I watched Marshland, and I went, wow, this is exactly what we're trying to do. This is exactly what we're trying to do. It's more focused on the psychology of the characters, and it's particularly focused on the characters of these police, who are not conventional heroes at all. It looked incredible. It looked like I wanted Mindhunter to look shot the way I wanted it to be shot. It even had, this beautiful car from the 80s. So it was a great, as well as it being one of my favorite films that I watch a lot, it was also something that drove us on to finish and see it through when the wheels kept falling off the bus,
Preguntaba Marianne, comentaba que después de terminar de escribir Mindhunter, Joe vio La isla mínima y le pregunta por las similitudes que encontró en las dos obras. Y comenta Joe que ya tenían terminado todo, estaban reescribiendo porque fue un proceso muy largo, mucha gente se entrometía, les decía que no iba a funcionar, era una historia sobre dos tipos que estaban hablando sobre asesinos en serie, no veían cómo eso iba a funcionar. Y entonces él vio La isla mínima y dijo, esto es justo lo que quiero hacer. Habla de la psicología de estos dos personajes, que son dos policías, que no son los típicos héroes que vemos en las series o en las películas policíacas, y visualmente también tenía muchas similitudes con Mindhunter, incluso el coche de los 80 que tanto le gusta. Y al ver la película, que ve muchas veces, encontró la motivación que necesitaba para seguir adelante con el proyecto de Mindhunter.
That was excellent.
Yeah. She's amazing, isn't she?
I think, I must be so hard to translate.
So you have told us about Mindhunter. What is your process to create all your stories?
¿Cómo es el proceso para crear historias más allá de Mindhunter? ¿Cómo te enfrentas a los proyectos?
I think the thing is I get fascinated with subjects, real life subjects, and then I inadvertently just research the hell out of them. I just read everything I can, and I look for all the clips I can on TV, and then I try and find real people. I try and accidentally bump into real people that are involved, in spying or policing or murder or whatever. And then when I've got a huge kind of reservoir of details and material, then a story starts to emerge. And it usually starts with a character or two main characters who've got a problem or a quest that they're trying to embark on. And then what I do is I kind of feed all of my research material and all the dialogue that I've heard and all the ideas that I've heard I sort of funnel it all into a couple of characters and a very basic story, and I just let it grow.
Okay.
It's very organic.
Mm-hmm.
Pues todo empieza con un tema real que me fascina. De repente un tema me fascina y me encuentro que estoy leyendo todo lo que encuentro sobre ese tema, quiero verlo todo. Siempre suele ser sobre gente real, y entonces intento también encontrarme, toparme así, como que no quiero la cosa, con policías o con quien sea el o la protagonista de la historia. Y cuando tengo una cantidad ingente de material, pues ya siento que es el momento de empezar a escribir la historia, que suele partir de un personaje o dos personajes que se enfrentan a un problema o tienen una misión, y vuelco todas esas ideas, esos diálogos, esa investigación que he hecho en dos personajes y una historia muy básica que empieza a crecer de una forma muy orgánica.
You're amazed, right?
Sounds better the second time round.
So, as a man that comes from playwriting and theater, how do you find that background in regards of, is it useful in regards of telling stories for film and series?
It's useful and it's unuseful.
Okay.
It's unuseful because they're completely different things to write.
Mm-hmm.
And if you write screenplays like you write theatre, they'd be terrible. And if you wrote theatre like you wrote screenplays, they'd be terrible. So in that respect, it's not useful. But it is useful in that I think in the theatre, you've got nothing but words. You've only got words. You've only got ideas and dialogue. And so they have to be really good. They have to hold an audience without anything else. So that kind of teaches you how to find ideas and how to express them in a compelling way. And then when you come to film and TV, you have to unlearn it all and edit it all and cut it down and change it. But you've got all these other things. You've got cinematography, and you've got music, and you've got lighting, and you've got camera angles and atmosphere that are these wonderful tools that you can suddenly enjoy using. But theatre does teach you some fundamentals that are really useful. And it teaches you some really bad things too, which you have to unlearn.
Preguntaba Marianne que Joy viene del teatro y si esa experiencia le ha resultado útil para contar historias en tele y en cine. Y comenta que sí y no, porque son dos procesos muy diferentes. Intentar escribir una obra de teatro de la misma manera que se escribe un guión o al contrario es una idea terrible. En ese sentido no resulta muy útil, pero sí lo que resulta muy útil del teatro es que simplemente se tienen palabras, ideas, diálogos y con esas palabras y esas ideas hay que captar al público, mantener su atención, con lo que eso sí resulta muy útil a la hora de plasmar una idea para un guión. Al trabajar en tele todo cambia porque se utilizan otros recursos, hay fotografía, música, luces, cámaras, son todas herramientas que sirven a la historia, mientras en el teatro te enseña los elementos básicos con los que hacer crecer tu historia.
I can expand on that a little bit.
Yes,
and just say, so I was watching Mindhunter the other day just for shits.
For fun.
Yeah, for fun. And I hadn't seen it for a while.
I watch it too for fun, so.
And I was looking at the Ed Kemper scene, which is
Yes.
about 15 minutes long. And Fincher said to me, make it 15 minutes long, like make it a 15-page scene. And even though I tried to write it like a screenplay and chop it up and, you know, parcel it out, he kept saying, no, hold the tension, write it like it's a theatre scene. And so I was able to write 15 pages of dialogue and make it compelling with a beginning, a middle, and end and growing tension because of the theatre. But I think also the idea of someone like Ed Kemper, who, if you've seen the show, he's a serial killer who sees serial killing as his oeuvre. He sees it as his work of art. And he complains about how hard it is and how exhausting and draining it is. You know, he's like Willy Loman in Death of a Salesman. That's the way he talks about crime. And I think a theatrical sensibility wrote that scene. I don't think many screenplays get written that way, and if you did write them that way, the producers would say, what's this garbage, you know?
Yes.
Comenta Joe que de vez en cuando ve Mindhunter pues, por pasar el rato, por diversión, porque así a veces apetece. Y estuvo viendo la escena con Ed Kemper, que es una escena de 15 minutos, que David Fincher le dijo que quería que fuera una escena que durase 15 minutos, que se leyera como una obra de teatro, que mantuviera la tensión del público, al igual que hizo una obra de teatro, y eso le permitió enfrentarlo como con un principio, una mitad y un final, al igual que al escribir un diálogo para el teatro, porque Ed Kemper era un asesino en serie que veía sus asesinatos como obras de arte. Él se creía se veía como un creador, hablaba de su trabajo como si fuera difícil, agotador, como si fuera Willy Loman en Muerte de un viajero, de un viajante. Y entonces esa sensibilidad teatral de Joe le permitió escribir una escena de 15 minutos, mantener la atención del público, que es algo que no suele ocurrir y que probablemente a un productor de una película normal no le hubiera gustado nada ese proceso.
From what we have seen and read about you, there seems to be a theme or a motivation in what you write. Is there a message intended?
En tus obras solemos encontrar una temática recurrente, una motivación. ¿Estás mandando algún mensaje con tus obras?
Well, I've always avoided messages, and I've avoided trying to have debates and arguments and stuff like that in my writing. Although that's kind of the job of theatre. I've always avoided it because I used to be a journalist, and I just think when it comes to issues, most journalists can tell it better than playwrights or TV writers. And our job isn't to really have messages and try and have debates. Our job is to illuminate in a far more existential, experiential way, and bring to light what it feels like to do things. And so I think my focus has always been on what things really feel like, how it really feels to be faced with these huge problems. Whether your problem is law enforcement and you're trying to catch serial killers, or whether your problem is that you're trying to survive in politics, in a very cynical time. I'm always interested in how it feels and what that person's life is like, and the screen gives you tools to do that. So I'm really kind of militant about it, and I sometimes don't work because my thing is, that's not real, that's not what it would feel like. I'm only interested in what it feels like and what they're thinking, what they're really thinking. So that's my preoccupation, for better or worse.
Pues intento evitar los mensajes. No veo que no siento mis obras o mis guiones como unos vehículos para crear debate o discusiones. Yo fui periodista y creo que los periodistas saben contar mucho mejor las historias. Yo creo que nuestro trabajo como guionistas es plasmar los sentimientos desde una forma mucho más existencial. Me fijo mucho más en los sentimientos, cómo se siente uno de los personajes, cómo se enfrentan a los problemas, cómo se enfrenta un policía a su trabajo intentando capturar a un asesino en serie o una persona que está en política en tiempos muy difíciles. Lo mío son más las emociones, los sentimientos, cómo es la vida de una persona. Y de hecho a veces no trabajo en algo si no me parece real. Necesito sentir qué piensan y qué sienten.
Writing-wise, you have been having a very prolific year. So I want to talk about the next projects. What are your next projects? When are we going to see another series run by you?
Háblanos un poco de tus proyectos futuros. Vamos a ver alguna nueva serie. ¿Qué nos puedes contar?
It could happen at any moment.
Oh, yes.
Or it might not happen for a long time. It's such an unpredictable business, You just really never know. So I've been developing a lot of things. Nothing's, looking like it's going to be made imminently. But everybody says they want to make it next year. But when people in the film industry or the TV industry say, we want to make it next year, that's just their way of saying, hello, I am a professional, pick me, I've got some money. It doesn't mean that they're going to do it. So the answer is I don't know. I don't know. I'm developing several different things. And you just sort of have to live with not ever knowing. You're just a pawn in a big game.
Pues podría pasar en cualquier momento o no podría pasar. Es que es algo totalmente impredecible. Tengo muchos proyectos entre manos, muchos están en desarrollo, pero no tengo nada concreto. Mucha gente de cine y tele me dicen que quieren producir proyectos el año que viene, pero realmente eso es algo simplemente que se dice, no es una muestra de interés real. Así que por ahora hay que saber vivir con la incertidumbre y saber de una pieza en una maquinaria enorme.
I mean, I'm developing a play at the moment, which I've been developing for a couple of years, and we kept having opportunities to put it on, and I kept saying no because I didn't think it was ready. And it's a play about a member of parliament who gets stalked, and we did a workshop late last year, and while we were doing the workshop, a member of parliament got stalked and then murdered. And we shelved it for a while. It suddenly became impossible to do. It didn't feel like we were playing anymore. It felt really sinister and a bad thing to do, so we stopped. So that's quite an interesting reason why things grind to a halt and you don't do anything for a while. Usually they're really boring business reasons, or they're to do with what's fashionable. But yeah, I'm just waiting for something to happen.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
In Spain we need the male.
She was.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I remember that happened. Sí. Comenta que tiene una obra de teatro entre manos, que no sabe todavía cuándo se va a producir, porque sentía que no estaba lista, pero sí que ha escrito también una obra sobre una diputada que le estaban acosando. Y mientras estaba en un taller escribiendo trabajando en esta obra de teatro, ocurrió realmente que a una diputada que estaba siendo acosada acabó siendo asesinada, y entonces decidieron olvidarse del proyecto porque les parecía demasiado real, demasiado siniestro. Que eso también es interesante analizar cómo algunas obras o algunos proyectos se olvidan o se aparcan en un cajón pues por cosas de modas o porque ya no interesan, pero otras veces es porque ocurre algo y hace que sea demasiado real lo que se está contando.
We have been talking since we met last year about about your love for Spain. You have been telling me how much you like Spain and the food and everything. And we talked about certain project that's going to be set in Barcelona. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. It's based on a book that was a New York Times bestseller. It's a thriller set in Barcelona called The Power Couple. And a really clever producer read it and thought of me. It's about a middle-aged couple. The woman is in the FBI. The husband is in the National Security Agency in America. And they come to Barcelona with their kids, and one of the kids gets kidnapped. But what it's really about is about Americans coming to Europe and being American and having guns and stuff like that. And everybody being freaked out and hating it. And as a consequence, they make almost no progress trying to find their daughter. So I'm writing that as a movie, and it's going really well, and Amazon are funding it, and it's gathering momentum. But there's a few Spanish films that are my favorite films. And I'm really quite simple-minded, so when I see a film that I love, I just want to do something like it, even if it's in Spain or it's somewhere else, or it's South America or Australia. I just want to do one like that, so that's what I'm doing.
Pregunta Marian sobre España. Sabe que le gusta mucho a Joey y sabe que tiene un proyecto que se va a rodar en Barcelona, o está a lo mejor se va a ambientar en Barcelona, y comenta Joey que está basado en un libro, un bestseller que se llama The Power Couple, que un productor lo leyó y se lo pasó a él, pensó en él, y trata sobre un matrimonio de mediana edad. Ella es agente del FBI, él trabaja en la Agencia Nacional de Seguridad, y van a Barcelona con la familia y secuestran a uno de los niños, a la hija. Pero realmente comenta Joey que de lo que trata es sobre cómo son los estadounidenses cuando vienen a Europa con sus pistolas, y cómo no les gusta nada ni encajan nada bien, y no se consigue avanzar nada en encontrar a su hija. Él la está escribiendo como una película que va bastante bien, pero está todavía en desarrollo, y comenta que es que le gustan mucho muchas películas españolas, y lo que suele ocurrirle es que cuando ve un proyecto o una película que le gusta, pues quiere repetirlo, ya esté en España, en América Latina, siente que quiere repetir y recrear lo que ha visto y le ha gustado tanto.
Do you want to mention other films, Spanish films that you liked or that inspired you, in case you remember?
Well, I just remember, when I was really, really young, and people like Moldova, and there seemed to be a whole lot of great films came out in the when I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s, came out of Spain, and I grew up in Australia, so it's very similar geography and kind of a similar culturally. This is going to sound ridiculous. You won't believe me, but there are similarities, and so I just really related to it. And now I'm marooned in England, and there's not much I can do about it. I'm spending as much.
You can move here. It's,
we'll see.
very close by.
It's just this career thing. So I'm spending as much time as I can in places like Spain and Greece and Paris and Europe in general. But Yeah, Almodovar I loved, and I guess I'm finding all these odd people, like I told you about Azor, the South American film. I think there's something there that I really relate to. I don't quite know what it is.
Él se crió en Australia y aunque os parezca difícil de creer, dice que la geografía es similar, la cultura también es muy diferente y se sentía muy identificado con esas películas que salían de España en los 80 y los 90, que le parecen buenísimas. Ahora está viviendo en Inglaterra por trabajo, pero intenta venir a España, a Grecia, a París, todo lo que puede, intenta venir a Europa y siempre está en busca de películas que le llamen y con las que se identifique. Ha visto recientemente una película sudamericana que también le ha gustado mucho.
You mentioned that The Power Couple is going to be a film, not a series or a miniseries. Why have you chosen to develop it into a film? And how difficult is to adapt a book into other sport or audiovisual stories?
It really depends on the book, you know. A lot of people think a book without much plot is difficult to adapt, but I don't really find that. I find that the more complex and interesting the idea, the easier it is to adapt and make something out of it. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is, with Power Couple, it's a long book, and it is from 3 different perspectives. But if you feel it the most fascinating and interesting thing about it, it's a movie length, you know.
Okay.
The most fascinating and interesting thing about it is the relationship of this couple disintegrating over 24 hours as they try and find their daughter, and the collision with European culture and with culture in Barcelona. And those were things I didn't want to spin out for 8 episodes. I wanted to compress them, and there are so many great films that are about a relationship disintegrating, or about people trying to find somebody, you know, who's been kidnapped in a very short time. So for those reasons, it just lent itself to a film that would be neater and cleaner and more exciting and simpler.
Great.
Volviendo a hablar de The Power Couple, comentabas que iba a ser una película. ¿Por qué has elegido este formato? Y por otro lado, ¿es difícil adaptar una novela al cine? Y comenta Joy que en cuanto a la adaptación depende del libro. Para él, The Power Couple le resulta muy interesante y muy fácil de llevar a la pantalla. Es un libro muy largo, ofrece 3 perspectivas y eso le resulta fascinante y tiene como el largo que necesita una película. En realidad es una historia sobre una relación que se está desintegrando a lo largo de 24 horas mientras estas 2 personas están buscando a su hija, pero en realidad vemos la historia de esta pareja, de cómo las diferencias que encuentra con la cultura, con el país, y no le parecía que diera para... O sea, él no quería tener que alargarlo en 8 episodios, quería comprimir la historia en la duración de un largometraje. Hay muchas películas muy buenas que tratan sobre relaciones que se están desintegrando, sobre encontrar a una persona secuestrada en un periodo de tiempo determinado, y eso le parecía muy interesante de esta película.
This is not your first book adapted to film, right? Or am I right? Or
No, I've done about 3 or 4.
Yes. Could you? Yes. I'm going to ask, and then she translates. Could you elaborate a little bit more? Why do you find complex stories easy to adapt? Because that's amazing, actually. Quite the opposite, you know, when you feel like it's so complex that they're not going to be able to pull it out, not be able to do a right or a well or a proper adaptation into film or series.
Pregunta Marianne si es la primera vez que adapta un libro al cine y responde Joe que ha adaptado ya unas 4 o 5 películas. Y le pregunta por qué le resulta tan fácil o por qué dice que le gusta adaptar novelas que son complejas, historias complicadas que de primeras parecería que sería muy difícil de encajar en la duración de una película, que quizá no se podría adaptar tan bien.
Well, I just find that complex ideas there's a lot of twists and turns in understanding them. And, you know, so in Mindhunter, it's about an FBI agent who's just not cut out to be an FBI agent. And he doesn't really know what he's doing. He doesn't know how to find out. And then he kind of lucks into this business of interviewing serial killers, and he finds that he's really good at it. And then he finds that he gets a girlfriend and he gets a promotion, and the more time he spends with these kind of twisted, frightening characters, the better his life becomes. And like a lot of people in this world, his career and his life takes off the more he delves into bad things, you know, and he becomes a very manipulative character, and he kind of feeds off serial killers. He makes it an industry, and that's a really complicated idea, but you can create a lot of story out of those ironies and paradoxes. Like the simple stories, you can't unpack much. They don't go very far, you know. They're quite basic. So I like stories that have got a lot of mystery to them, because the more mystery, the more difficult it is to understand, the more story there is.
Okay. En Mindhunter es un buen ejemplo de cómo le gusta a Joe las historias complejas. Trata sobre un agente del FBI que realmente no encaja no es un agente del FBI al uso, realmente no sabe lo que está haciendo, hasta que encuentra a los asesinos en serie y se da cuenta de lo bien que se le da entrevistar a los asesinos y de lo mucho que le aporta. Porque de repente encuentra una novia, asciende en el trabajo, y es todo gracias o está relacionado con el tiempo que pasa con estos personajes tan terribles, estos asesinos en serie. Su profesión va despegando cuanto más se acerca a estas cosas malas, incluso cambia su personalidad, se vuelve un poco manipulador. Y eso me parece muy, muy, muy interesante, ver cómo de una idea muy compleja podemos crear una historia con muchas paradojas y muchos giros. Sin embargo, en una historia sencilla es que no da para sacarle nada de jugo. Lo que me gustan son las historias que tienen muchos misterios y dan mucho juego.
I can expand on that.
Yeah, please.
Just to say, one of the other books that I did was The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And in terms of plot, it's very simple. They just walk across America and fend off threat.
Another cult film. You became,
which I made into a film.
You're a creator of cult products.
I just went along for the ride with that one. But the thing about that film is what it's really about is a father trying to explain to a very small boy, his son, all about starvation and suicide and murder and the apocalypse, the end of the world. And then what starts happening throughout the land is cannibalism and mass rape and all kinds of terrible things. And the mother has killed herself because she can't face it. And this book is so simple and so beautiful, and the plot is very simple, but those are very, very complex ideas. You can't explain those things to children easily. So a man whose job it is to explain all these things, explain why they're in such a weird predicament. Everybody said, you can't film that, it's unfilmable. And I quite honestly thought, what are you talking about? It's fantastic. And it was really quite easy to do.
volviendo a otro de las adaptaciones cinematográficas, trabajé en la adaptación de La carretera, el libro de Cormac McCarthy, que tiene, de primeras, podría parecer que la trama es sencilla, es simplemente un padre y su hijo atravesando Estados Unidos, pero realmente es una película con muchísima complejidad, porque este padre, en esa travesía que hace con su hijo, le tiene que ir explicando unos conceptos complicadísimos como el suicidio, el hambre, digamos el apocalipsis, el fin del mundo. A su alrededor empieza a verse el canibalismo, las violaciones, incluso la madre del pequeño se ha quitado la vida porque no puede enfrentarse a la situación, con lo cual podría parecer una trama sencilla, pero desde luego que refleja unas ideas tremendamente complejas. Y a la hora de llevarla al cine había mucha gente que pensaba que era imposible llevarla al cine, pero a mí me pareció un reto apasionante.
Let's talk about another film of yours, King of Thieves, which I really loved. You tell the true story of a robbery that was perpetrated by senior burglars. It has a grim conclusion. In the beginning, they seem to be endearing grandpas. At the end, we realize that they are dangerous, bloodthirsty psychopaths. Why did you choose to tell that story that way?
Hablemos ahora de otra de tus películas, Rey de Ladrones, que está basada en una historia real sobre un atraco que perpetraron unos aparentes abuelos que resultan ser al final unos sanguinarios psicópatas. ¿Podrías contarnos un poco sobre la película? ¿Por qué decidiste también contar esta película y por qué de esta manera y en este formato?
Well, that film is a good example of the weirdness of being a screenwriter and a filmmaker, because that was a real life story. All these old men, all these old boys got together to rob a giant diamond vault. Mm-hmm. And everybody in England, to a man, thought, isn't that wonderful, those cuddly old men.
Yeah.
Good on them.
I thought so too in the very beginning of the film. Then I got really scared.
I've never met anybody that doesn't think of them as lovable, cuddly old men. But I met a lot of crooks when I was a crime reporter, and I've met a lot of crooks just in the street, you know, and they're not lovable, cuddly old men. A lot of them are horrible. A lot of them are thick, nasty, selfish morons. And I really wanted to write that story. And Scotland Yard provided me with about 100 pages of transcripts because they bugged their cars and they bugged their homes. So I had all these transcribed conversations, which were, you know, extraordinary. Yes. They veered between Shakespearean complexity and utter idiocy. And some of them were very funny. And so that lit the touch paper. After that, I thought I had to do it. And then I had lunch with one of them who was immensely funny and entertaining and deluded and mad, and it was just too rich to ignore.
Oh, I didn't know you had lunch with one of the burglars when he was in jail?
No, when he got out.
Oh my God.
I had this 4-hour lunch with him.
You are very lucky because you run into all these people. I mean, serial killers, FBI agents, CIA agents. I mean, we don't run.
I go looking for them. You got to find them.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it was pretty fascinating.
Pues es un buen ejemplo esta película sobre el trabajo de un guionista. Está basada en una historia real y os comento que cuando ocurrió, toda Inglaterra aplaudía a estos señores mayores, a estos abuelillos que le parecían entrañables. Pero yo he sido periodista de sucesos y he conocido a esa gente y os puedo decir que no tienen nada de majos, son personas horribles, súper egoístas. Y es que me pareció muy interesante contar esa historia. Afortunadamente Scotland Yard me pudo pasar unas 100 páginas aproximadamente de transcripciones porque habían pinchado sus coches y sus casas y entonces estuve leyendo unas conversaciones extraordinarias, iban un poco entre la complejidad de los diálogos de Shakespeare a la más extrema idiotez, pero me resultó muy, muy, muy interesante y quería llevar esta historia al cine. De hecho, comí con uno de ellos, estuve 4 horas comiendo con ellos y vamos, me parecía que no podía dejar escapar esta historia.
Idiots are really easy to write too.
That is going to be, the
Too
headline
easy.
tomorrow on the newspaper. How come?
Why? I just think people are drawn to it and they respond to it. Particularly in England. I don't know why, but
No sé.
I mean, look at the government. It-
Es que en inglés no hay más que ver cómo atraen las historias de los idiotas. Desde luego no hay más que ver el gobierno de Inglaterra.
I'm going to cut to the chase and make the $1 million question, not about Mindhunter, though, because there's not going to be a season.
Well, I always say never, but I always say it with a big twinkle in my eye. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be a season.
There's going to be a season 3.
Look, there's two halves of me that are at war the whole time. And one half of me says, it might happen one day, you never know. David might ring up, or write me a sweet letter, and we might decide to get the band back together. And, why not? We're both,
Oh, you're a dreamer. A
we
sweet
could do
letter
it.
by David Fincher?
But the other half of me knows that we're both really busy. He's super busy. It would cost a bomb. It's really hard to do. To get a Hollywood director to do one episode is almost impossible. To get him to do all those episodes and oversee it is almost impossible. Netflix won't probably give us the same budget again.
Okay.
Because they've realised that they've become a profit and loss organisation. So it's easier to do something else. So there's probably not going to be another one. But, I think good things, burn brightly, and then they're gone, and we miss them, and that's something. I mean, look, when you put a play on, it goes on, and sometimes you never see it again,
Yeah, and that's why they become cult series or films or plays, If you keep going maybe too much, people get bored or just abandon them.
Yeah, we don't want to we want to kill the band while it's on top.
Yeah. Okay.
Pregunta Marian sobre Mindhunter si habrá una tercera temporada, y Joe comenta que tiene el corazón dividido, que hay una parte de él que piensa, quién sabe, a lo mejor un día me llama David Fincher y me dice que volvamos, pero otra parte de mí dice que sabe que estamos los dos muy liados, que cuesta muchísimo dinero, es muy complicado, es prácticamente imposible conseguir que un director de Hollywood dirija una temporada entera, supervise una producción así. Netflix probablemente no les diera el mismo presupuesto. Entonces, también hay que pensar que lo bueno, si breve, pues 2 veces bueno. Es como una obra de teatro, que tienen una duración corta y es mucho mejor dejarlo cuando estás en buen momento, sin llegar a aburrir y sin quemarte.
There are a lot of, after Mindhunter, there are a lot of new series about serial killers, docu-series, and there's a whole new genre on true crime and all that jazz. And I wanted to ask you, because when that started happening, I kept thinking about Mindhunter and our talks and everything. And do you think that they are completely different, their perspective is completely different? Do you think that your series opened up a tiny window for these other series and projects to elbow their way out?
Yeah, I do.
I do too.
I mean, my wife just says that's my vanity, but
No.
I think that, yeah, suddenly everybody started doing things that were suspiciously similar. And it's kind of weird, because we had a whole bunch of really serious rules when we did Mindhunter, what we weren't going to do. And all the things that we weren't going to do are all the things that they're doing in these new shows.
I know.
Comenta Marian que desde que salió Mindhunter parece que ahora ha surgido un nuevo género del true crime, y le pregunta si cree que puede haber sido también influencia de Mindhunter, si pudo haber abierto algo de paso a todas estas historias, y comenta Joe entre risas que sí, que desde luego lo que le resulta chocante es que todas las reglas que tenían, unas reglas muy estrictas de cosas que no querían hacer, son todo lo que sí han acabado haciendo en todas estas películas y series sobre asesinos en serie.
Also, there's a great English playwright you might have heard of called Tom Stoppard,
Yes.
who's got this amazing quote about good art and good writing, and he says that it's like a cricket bat. A cricket bat is not a piece of wood. A cricket bat is actually about 15 pieces of wood, very carefully and artfully put together so that it's sprung like a dance floor. And when you hit the ball, it travels for miles. And good writing is like that. If you don't put the 15 pieces together really carefully, it's just a lump of wood. And the ball won't go anywhere, and you'll hurt your hands, and everyone will be massively disappointed. And good writing is like that, and good TV is like that, and good movies are like that, and good art is like that. And a lot of the things that came after Mindhunter are just a lump of wood. They're one sort of hunk of wood burnished really well. And I think that's a real shame. But I guess it shows that people really wanted more Mindhunter, so they invented lots of sort of clones. So that's flattering, I suppose.
And dangerous at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And dangerous at the same time.
Oh yeah, it's really scary from the point of view of the survivors.
Yes.
I mean, it can't be any fun at all to have survived a serial killer, or to have one of your relatives killed by one, and then suddenly it's like Spider-Man, they're everywhere. There's like 5 seasons of it.
Yes. Well, there is a scandal and a lot of controversy, and we were talking about it on the series of The Killer of Milwaukee, the one in Netflix, because they accused Ryan Murphy of glamorizing the murder, and the family of the victims were complaining. Do you think that Hollywood likes to glamorize psychopaths? Oh, I'm sorry.
Should
Keep
I
talking.
translate your previous? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you go.
Sí, porque comentaba Joe que el dramaturgo Tom Stoppard tiene una cita muy interesante sobre qué es el buen arte y cómo es la buena escritura. Y comenta que es como un bate de cricket, ¿sabéis? Cricket como que es una especie, digamos, de béisbol que se juega en Inglaterra. Y comenta que un bate parece un trozo de madera, pero no es simplemente un trozo de madera plana. Son 15 trozos de madera que se han trabajado que prácticamente como una pista de baile para que al impactar la pelota pueda viajar durante muchos kilómetros, tenga mucho efecto. Y es el mismo proceso al escribir. Hay que encontrar esas 15 ideas, digamos, y para crear una buena obra de arte. Porque si no se escribe así, es prácticamente como si fuera un trozo de madera y hasta un bloque de madera bien decorada. Así es como podrían definirse algunas de las series que han salido después de Mindhunter, como un bloque de madera, pero bien decorado. Pero imaginaba yo que el interés que ha surgido a raíz de la serie, pues igual lo que demuestra es que la gente está muy interesada y tiene mucho interés por esto. Y comenta Marianne que también ahora hay bastante polémica con la serie de Ryan Murphy de Netflix, que las víctimas, los familiares de las víctimas y los supervivientes están quejándose de que se está romantizando un poco con la idea de los asesinos en serie. Yeah, comenta Joe.
So you go now.
So yes.
Yes, I know. But I want you to tell us more and elaborate. And I'm going to ask one more thing. Do you think that Hollywood, meaning the industry, platforms, are presenting audiences with the idea that there are people above the law?
Presenting with what?
Presenting audiences with the idea that there are people above the law, that it can get away with it. Oh.
Aprovecho para traducir.
Yes.
Pregunta Marianne si la forma de contar las historias de Hollywood puede dar la sensación a los espectadores de que hay personas que están por encima de la ley, gente que consigue siempre salirse con la suya y se va de rositas.
That was Netflix lawyers on the phone.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
They're going to be waiting for us when we step out.
I don't know if people just make that distinction, when they're making films about above the law and not above the law. A lot of people making films just think everybody's above the law, So Serial Killer shows And crime shows often operate in a morality vacuum. They don't have anything to do with conventional morality. And also everything that appears on the screen has to, by definition, have a glamour to it. There's very few people that set about dismantling all that. And we did with Mindhunter, but we could only do it because David Fincher was a giant, massively profitable movie director, so he's making them a lot of money, so we were allowed to do it. So yeah, I do think that they glamorize it, and they don't, and they don't care, It's a franchise. It's like Spider-Man. It's like Marvel. It's like Batman. It's become a franchise, and people watch it while they're doing the ironing and doing the dishes, and they don't think too much about it.
What did they ask you for when you did Mindhunter? I'm sorry, I get enthusiastic.
Responde Joe que sí, pero porque hay mucha gente que al plantear este tipo de proyectos no piensan en eso, ellos piensan que están todos por encima de la ley y al retratar a los asesinos en serie y a todo este tipo de personajes tan terribles, son toda gente que opera fuera de la moralidad normal. Y también, por otro lado, todo lo que aparece en la pantalla es más glamuroso, pocos quieren presentar una realidad descarnada y cruda. Ellos pudieron hacerlo porque tenían el respaldo de un nombre de peso como David Fincher. Y comenta Joe que ahora estas series se han convertido como una especie de franquicia, son como Spider-Man, Batman, un producto de Marvel que la gente pone de fondo mientras está planchando y ni siquiera llega a pensar en lo que está viendo.
Yes. I've been in rooms where they ask you, we want more true crime, and they refer to this kind of series, but what did they ask you? Or what do you think they might ask when you pitch a series like that? You had rules. You came up with the rules for Mindhunter beforehand, before pitching it, or when, the giants and platforms came and said, well, we want more gore, more blood, more, drama. And you said, no, I'm going to stop here because of ethics. And
It's really complicated. Because I've pitched things that I thought were a bit like Mindhunter, and they've gone, nah, we want something more like Mindhunter. Oh. And then I've also pitched things that are very different, and they're not interested, and they explained to me very carefully that the whole Mindhunter thing was wonderful, but too dark and too expensive and too complicated, and haven't I got something simpler, So there's all sorts of different responses, But I think really good work escapes. It doesn't get commissioned. It doesn't even necessarily get nurtured. It just escapes by accident. And then everybody goes, what was all that about? And it doesn't often happen twice, So the curse of Mindhunter is that there are all these weird copies, but it's almost impossible to do anything like that. Yes. The same way again.
Pregunta Marian si estas reglas que comentaba antes Joe, si las tenían ya establecidas antes de presentar el proyecto, si surgieron al interesarse en las plataformas, si fue porque le pidieron que hubiera más sangre, más drama, más gore. Y comenta Joe que él a veces, cuando presenta ideas, le piden que sea más parecido a Mindhunter, o que él a lo mejor cree que se parece a Mindhunter, pero la gente que recibe la idea no le parece para nada. Hay muchas personas que le dicen que no interesan, que creen que Mindhunter era demasiado oscuro, demasiado complicado, le piden cosas más sencillas. Así que, como veis, pues hay respuestas para todo, y él cree que las ideas y las obras buenas simplemente surgen, no están pensadas y machacadas, simplemente surgen porque sí. Y ahora mismo hay muchas copias de Mindhunter, quizá, pero no están a la altura de la obra original.
So let's go back to your beginnings. Did you always dream to be a writer, a playwright, a film writer? What was the beginning of that?
Háblanos un poco de tus comienzos. ¿Siempre habéis querido ser guionista o dramaturgo? Cuéntanos un poco cómo fue.
Yeah, I always wanted to write something. I didn't know what.
Okay.
And then I suppose I started seeing theatre, like Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller. And, you know, I loved it. Didn't imagine that I could do it. So I tried a whole bunch of other things. I played music. For a long time I wanted to be a musician. And then I wanted to be a journalist. And then I went to art school. And none of those things worked out. And then, you know, when I had nothing left to try, I tried playwriting. And that suddenly really worked really quickly. And then from playwriting, I went to films and TV. And then it really wasn't until I'd got successful at all of them that I realized that they were all sort of part of the same thing. You know, even the journalism, it was all kind of the same thing that I was trying to do, just in different ways. And I wrote a musical a few years ago, which was a hit. And so it's odd. So I've done lots and lots of very different things, a little bit, you know, because I wanted to do lots of different things. You know, I'm not somebody that worships TV or worships movies or worships music, one thing or the other. It's lots of different things, and I just do what I feel like that year.
Pues siempre supe que quería escribir, pero no sabía qué es exactamente que quería hacer. Me encantaba el teatro, vi obras de Arthur Miller, pero nunca pensé que yo pudiera hacer algo que estuviera a ese nivel. Estuve tocando música, fui periodista, estudié Bellas Artes, pero no salía nada de ahí, nada, no me sentía que era a lo que yo quería dedicarme. Y entonces volví a la dramaturgia y a partir de ahí pues también empecé a trabajar en tele, en cine. Y ya vino todo como rodado, y al echar la vista atrás me doy cuenta de que todo está relacionado. Escribí una obra de teatro musical hace unos años que también tuvo bastante éxito, y veo cómo todos estos palos que he ido tocando a lo largo de mi vida pues me han llevado a este momento.
I'm sorry, that was a really boring answer. Can I do it again?
Yes, of course.
Ha sido una respuesta un poco... Voy a repetir la respuesta porque no me queda muy a gusto yo con lo que he contado.
I discovered along the way that there was people like Anthony Minghella, who was a great filmmaker, who was a bit like me in that he discovered that if you put music together with film, together with great dialogue, together with a unique idea or point of view that nobody would listen to ordinarily, and you found a way of making them, you know, into a work of art or into a TV thing or a film thing, then there was something about that was better than all the separate little parts. So music together with celluloid, together with dialogue. So I think it was realizing that I wanted to synthesize all those things because then there would be an explosion.
Wonderful.
Pienso en Anthony Minghella, que es también una persona que le gustan muchas cosas como a mí, y él fue, a través de él, pues descubrí que al unir la música con las películas, con los diálogos, con una idea original, con un punto de vista totalmente diferente, se crea una obra de arte, una película, una serie que engloba todo y es mejor que cada una de esas cosas por separado. Lo que me gusta es sintetizarlo todo para hacerlo explotar.
So I asked you about your beginnings because there are a lot of students here in the audience, and I would like you, if you could, give them a little bit of advice for beginners. What would you advise to a young student that is starting this career and in this profession?
Yeah, sure. And you can ask me any questions you like as well.
We're going to open up to questions now.
I mean, as a sidebar to the three, before I get into the three, one thing that I would say is ask questions as much as you can and meet people as much as you can and get the secrets from them if you can, get the secrets out of them. Did you want to? translate the question?
Sí, le pregunta Mariana Joy si os puede dar algunos consejos y en primer lugar dice que preguntéis siempre. De hecho, ahora vamos a abrir una ronda de preguntas para que podáis dirigiros a él. Y también es súper importante que conozcáis a gente y que consigáis que os cuenten sus secretos.
Tough thing to do. You know,
Yeah,
for them to
this-
tell your secrets.
yeah.
Unless we have you here, you know, it's kind of difficult.
It's really hard to boil it down to 3, but I think probably the most important thing for me, and this isn't true of everybody else, but it is true for me, is that you have to be really passionate about the idea that you're doing. And I've tried to do stuff that I'm not passionate about, and it never really works. And if you do something that you're passionate about, it's a lot more painful and a lot more difficult. But it's always better. It's always good. It's always the stuff that lives on.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. Do you want to translate?
Okay.
Yes.
Os va a dar 3 consejos. El primero y el más importante para él, siempre para él, es que hay que trabajar en proyectos por los que sientes verdadera pasión. Él ha intentado trabajar en proyectos en los que no creía firmemente y no funciona. Trabajar en algo que te apasiona es más duro, es más difícil, pero siempre es mejor, siempre se va a conseguir salir adelante.
And then the second one, I think is really important, and not many people say this, but all my writer friends agree with me. And this is, be really careful who you listen to, because you're going to get notes all the time, and some of them are going to be idiotic, and some of them are going to be just really boring. They're going to be just people that don't get paid unless they turn up and give you a note. And 1 or 2 of them will be profoundly good. Yes. And you've got to work out who you're going to listen to and who's not worth listening to and who's worth listening to. Because when I was a really young writer, you know, I sometimes listened to everybody, and sometimes I didn't listen to anybody. And both of those things are really stupid. So you've got to kind of size up who you're working with and who you're talking to, and work out how smart they are, and work out if they're as smart as you, or smarter than you, or dumber than you, and what to take as a note and what to ignore.
Let's keep the last piece of advice. We open up to questions from the audience, and then you do your final advice.
Oh, my final advice?
Oh, yeah, the biggest one.
You're building it up too much.
Os traduzco el segundo consejo y luego abrimos a ronda de preguntas. Dice que una de las cosas también súper importantes es pensad muy bien de quién os aconseja. Siempre va a haber gente que os da notas, siempre va a haber alguien que tenga algún comentario, pero algunos no van a valer nada. Hay mucha gente a la que le pagan si no dicen algo, sienten que no están haciendo su trabajo, y hay que ser muy, muy consciente de a quién se le escucha. De joven él a veces escuchaba a todo el mundo, otras no escuchaba a nadie, lo cual eso es un sinsentido, pero hay que andarse siempre con mucho ojo, pensar muy bien quién te dice qué, saber analizar qué te dicen y escuchar solo a la gente que merece la pena.
Abrimos a preguntas de la audiencia, si les parece. We'll go open up to the audience to ask you questions.
Hola, buenas noches.
Hola.
Mi pregunta son 2 preguntas.
Ponete de pie así te vemos.
Hola,
Oh,
buenas noches.
Sandra.
Mi pregunta son 2 preguntas. La primera tiene que ver con qué consejos nos podrías dar a creadores nuevos sobre alguna de las circunstancias que nos vamos encontrando comúnmente con algunas personas cercanas a las ¿cómo se dice? Bueno, productoras, con respecto a cláusulas que te ponen a partir de proponerte que tú tienes que firmar una cláusula donde dice que la idea que tú les estás presentando quizás sea igual o parecida a una que ellos tienen. Esa es la primera. Y la segunda tiene que ver con respecto al IP que se puede llegar a defender. ¿Cómo y cuál sería la manera en la que para también un nuevo creador hay oportunidad de poder defender el IP frente a una plataforma? Gracias.
So there is two questions.
Yeah.
The first is, what advice could you give to new creators who are asked to sign clauses when they pitch an idea? They're asked to sign a clause by the platform saying that the idea they're pitching might be similar to an idea that they already have in the works and the platform. So that would be the first question, if you would like to answer that, and then I'll translate the second one.
Oh, that's tricky.
Yeah.
Complicado.
It's tricky.
Complicado.
Yeah.
I think there's two answers to that. One answer is, have you got a good lawyer?
Yes, I know that you were going to say that.
Tiene dos respuestas. La primera respuesta sería, ¿tienes un buen abogado o abogada?
Unleash your lawyer on that shit fast. And then the second part of the answer is, yeah, I'm hearing about this kind of thing happening. And what I can tell you anecdotally is when they tell you they've got a similar idea, it either means they don't want to do it, so they're pretending they've got something else that they're, so that they can drop you easily at some point. Or they think it could be such a big smash hit, they want a bigger share of your separated rights. Separated rights are when you do something that's a bit of something else and it's got a lot of your own input into it, you can sometimes say that character and that storyline is mine, it's my separated rights. So I would always be really cynical and wary when they say that, and I wouldn't sign anything without getting a good lawyer to look at it, or even a bad lawyer. And apart from anything else, I think that's really mean to pull that on a writer. It's like, dude, it's,
It's true.
it's like a sausage factory.
Pues aparte a poner todo siempre en manos de abogados, dice que sabe que esto está ocurriendo y que muchas veces cuando comentan que una plataforma o una productora comenta que tiene una idea similar, puede ser por un lado porque no les interese hacerlo y es como una forma sencilla de aparcar la idea, pero por otro lado también puede ser porque piensen que va a ser tan grande que quieren una mayor parte de los derechos separados, que se llaman en inglés. Y esto tiene que ver con que un personaje, una historia, un guionista puede decir, ese personaje o esa historia lo he creado yo. Y ellos lo que quieren es pues atarlo todo, las productoras, para que eso no pueda ocurrir. Así que realmente lo que hay que ser siempre es muy cínico, no firmar nada nunca sin que lo haya visto un abogado. Y desde luego le parece horrible que estén haciendo este tipo de cosas, estas prácticas.
The second part
question was how to defend IP. Like for new creators, how do they defend their IP?
How do they keep it too?
Keep it.
Oh my God.
Well, it comes back to the lawyer thing.
Yeah.
And I know that's kind of a boring answer, but I've been in quite a few skirmishes now, and I've reached for the lawyers, and they've been really great. There's a whole bunch of lawyers at the WGA. At one point, I had this group of about half a dozen incredible female lawyers there that just saved my neck, saved my career for nothing. So I just think when you do something, make sure your agent knows about it and has got a copy of it. And then if you have to reach for lawyers, then it's on record that you wrote this thing. I mean, when I was really young, like decades ago, in the 90s, I would post scripts to myself. That's how you proved that you wrote that script and it was all your idea. But I think you'd be amazed how smart some lawyers are, and you can talk them through why your IP is so original to you and no one else could have written it, and they will understand it. I've had to do that before. And it's quite heartening that they understand and they go into bat for you. But it needs powerful people to do that, because as a writer, writers are slightly infantilized sometimes and treated like children. And getting a lawyer onto them is a good way of scaring them off and making it official.
Pues de nuevo las respuestas son los abogados. Joyce dice que él se ha visto en situaciones de esas y siempre hay que contar con abogados, ponerlo todo en manos de abogados. De hecho, el sindicato de guionistas él contó con un equipo de abogadas que vamos, salvaron su carrera. Y siempre es muy importante también que si tenéis una IP, que vuestro agente sepa que esa IP existe, que tenga una copia, pero vamos, que con los abogados estáis siempre cubiertos. De hecho, él en los 90 se mandaba guiones a sí mismo para demostrar que era suyo, y de lo que se ha dado cuenta a lo largo de todas estas décadas de trabajo es que los abogados se las saben todas. A veces resulta increíble que les explicas cuál es la IP y ellos lo entienden y tienen toda una batería de herramientas a su disposición para meterle miedo a las productoras, a las plataformas y saben cómo enfrentarse a estas situaciones.
¿Otra pregunta?
Hello.
Ponete de pie así te vemos,
Okay.
gracias.
So you were saying Fincher gave you that like that 15-minute scene, that 15-minute scene to write. So I'd like to know how's the process for you to write for directors, because you don't shoot your own scripts. So how's the process? Are you strict with, I don't know, the dialogue, or in that instance of like shooting with Fincher? Is Fincher giving you advice, or you're giving him advice, or how is that process or the input? Thank you.
Le preguntan cómo fue el proceso de escribir esa escena de 15 minutos con David Fincher.
Well, you know, when you work with a director, it's a bit like a marriage. You know, this is another good bit of advice. Choose your directors really carefully if you can, if you're allowed to, because they do need to really understand what you're doing, and you need to really understand what they're doing. And sometimes that takes a long time to work out, you know, and there's a lot of trust involved. So when I work with a director, and Fincher's a good example, it might be a throwaway comment. It might be, no, make it 15 pages. The more the merrier. It's not a strict instruction. It's just a throwaway comment. It's just a bit of encouragement. But the way to work it out is different with every director, you know. And you've got to just if you can, make sure that you really understand each other and really trust each other. And there are some directors that see writers as just, you know, the plumber, you know, a tradesman that's doing something for them. And you've got to be careful of that. And then there are directors that are smart enough to see what you're trying to do even when you can't see it. And they draw it out of you. So you've got to be able to recognize that, you know. It is like getting married, you know. It's finding the person that brings out the best in you, that you trust each other. You're going to be stuck with each other for a long time. So you've got to be choosy and careful.
Pues trabajar con directores es prácticamente como un matrimonio, así que ahí os doy otro consejo, que es que si podéis, elegid muy bien al director o a la directora con la que trabajéis, que sea una persona con la que os entendáis, que ellos entiendan perfectamente lo que hacéis vosotros y que vosotros entendáis lo que hacen ellos, porque tiene que haber una confianza plena, tener un entendimiento y una confianza plena. Hay algunos directores que ven a los guionistas como si fueran, pues, digamos, un mero fontanero que viene a hacer servicio, pero otros cuidan mucho, saben de la importancia, incluso ven más que tú, incluso algunos saben sacar la historia que tienes dentro. Por eso vuelvo a repetir que es como un matrimonio, porque es encontrar a la persona que sabe sacar lo mejor de ti y con la que vas a pasar muchísimo tiempo.
Hi, Hi.
Hi, buenos dias.
You mentioned that sometimes like creativity comes and goes and everything. So I was wondering if like what you do personally to get out of a creative like slump.
Le preguntan qué hace para enfrentarse a los bloqueos.
I do the same thing that I do to write or do anything, which is I just soak up lots and lots of influences. If I'm going through a moment where it's hard to write, I just go back to my favorite things. I watch my favorite films and TV shows, and I read my favorite books, and I listen to my favorite music. And I just kind of spoil myself and treat myself like a patient in a hospital and just try and have as much fun as possible. And that's how you switch on the creativity again. When you have to sort of get yourself inspired and enthused again. And you have to work quite hard at that and recognize when it's happening.
Pues me enfrento a los bloqueos creativos de la misma manera que a la escritura de cero. Lo que hago es que me sumerjo en la información, me documento, tiro de mis influencias y cuando me cuesta mucho escribir, vuelvo a mis cosas favoritas, a mis series, a mis películas, a mi música, a los libros favoritos. Digamos que me mimo, me trato como si fuera un paciente y en cuanto empiezo otra vez a divertirme es cuando noto que vuelve la creatividad, empieza a fluir otra vez.
I think Chekhov said keep your influences close, meaning, just keep your favorite writers and your favorite shows, and your favorite films around you all the time for inspiration.
Decía Chekhov que hay que mantener las influencias muy, muy cercanas, no hay que perderlas de vista. Hay que tener siempre muy presente las pelis y las series y los libros que más os gustan.
Por aquí.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi pregunta está relacionada con la construcción de los personajes. Comentaba anteriormente que hay una tendencia a glamuralizar los psico-killers. Entonces, en relación a las últimas series y películas que se han realizado, a mí lo que me gustaría es saber cómo trabaja esa anti-glamuralización. Es decir, evitar el glamour, porque es difícil, porque ya per se un psico-killer es fascinante. Entonces, en la escena, por ejemplo, de Ed Kemper, durante 15 minutos hablando, la elegancia que muestra el personaje, el acting del actor, la hipnosis que plantea su diálogo, es realmente complicado no sentirse fascinado.
It's a question about character construction, and as we were mentioning before, how there's so many shows that seem to embellish the whole world of serial killers. So how do you go about not doing that? How do you go about avoiding when you're working with a subject that's as fascinating as a serial killer, as a psychopath, in scenes like those 15 minutes with Ed Kemper? It's mesmerizing. His presence is absolutely mesmerizing. It's hard not to be kind of hypnotized by what we're seeing on screen. How do you avoid that?
Well, I think if you look very carefully at serial killers, look at as many documentaries as you can and transcripts and truthful accounts, do your research and you look at it with a clear eye, you'll see the truth of it, and then your job is to just write the truth of it and try and get that past everyone, because sometimes they don't want the truth. But I think the two parts to it are try and see the truth of what a character is, of what the character is, and then try and sell everybody on it, And I've always thought the criminals that I've met, and I've met one or two killers as well, there's a fascinating banality about them that's got nothing to do with the latest Netflix show. And I'm more interested in reality than what everyone else is doing on the screen. So it's there, you just got to go and look for it and be rigorous about it. And I think have a little bit of faith that the truthfulness in characters is still a great thing. When all we had was novels, it was an essential thing. And it sort of gets forgotten now. But I just think be as truthful as you can and work really hard to make it the truth and not the truth according to Silence of the Lambs or Jeffrey Dahmer or Dexter or whatever else is out there.
La verdad es que al mirar, al analizar de cerca a los asesinos en serie, al documentarse, al ver muchos documentales, transcripciones, testimonios, siempre con la cabeza fría, la realidad que se esconde ahí es lo que a él le interesa, es contar la verdad de esos personajes, encontrar la forma de contar esa verdad. Y una de las partes más complicadas también es dar con esa verdad y también venderla y que esa idea interese. Él ha conocido a criminales, asesinos, y lo que más le ha fascinado es la banalidad de esas personas, que no es algo que se vea en las series de Netflix, y eso es lo que a él le interesa. Hay que ser muy riguroso, hay que contar la realidad del personaje, como hacían las novelas. Cuando solo teníamos libros, pues se basaba en los personajes, y hay que encontrar la verdad, no la verdad que nos cuenta El silencio de los corderos o la verdad según Jeffrey Dahmer o Dexter, sino la verdad del propio personaje.
So before you said that when you were during Mindhunter, you had a series of rules that newer shows are breaking. So I wonder if you can tell us what were some of those rules.
Sure.
I didn't want to ask that because the Netflix lawyers are around.
¿Nos puedes contar alguna de esas reglas que están rompiendo estas nuevas series y que vosotros implantasteis en Mindhunter?
So it's a show about cops catching bad guys, and our rules were no fights, no car chases, no bullying, no explicit killing scenes, no salacious treatment of any kind of deviant sexuality. Long, complicated arguments if the discourse was long and complicated. And then we also had a sidebar that was all about Hannibal Lecter, which was no opera, no drinking red wine, fava beans, no charm, no empathy, no poetry. If you add up all of the rules, then you get Ed Kemper. And also the other big one was the big myth, the big Hollywood myth, which is there's really not much difference between the hunter and the hunted. And we were like, fucking bullshit. There's a huge difference. Just talk to somebody who's been cornered by a fucking serial killer. You know, the cops, the psychiatrists, the psychologists, the academics, you know, the people that are sort of in Mindhunter hunting these men who hunt women are completely different. You know, there's no similarity whatsoever. So we just kind of deconstructed everything and tried really hard to kind of demystify it. It was really deliberate and intentional, you know. It took a lot of many weeks of sitting in a room together talking it over before I even wrote anything.
Pues las reglas principales en esta serie sobre unos policías que intentan atrapar a unos asesinos era que no habría peleas, no habría persecuciones, no habría escenas morbosas, no se mostrarían los asesinatos directamente, así que os podéis hacer la idea de que pues fue muy diferente. De hecho, también tenían una lista de cosas que no querían hacer, basada en Hannibal Lecter. No habría ópera, no habría vino tinto, no habría nada de poesía, y así salió Ed Hunter. También querían alejarse, Ed Kemper, perdón, así querían alejarse muchísimo de este mito de Hollywood de el cazador y el cazado tienen mucho que ver, y dice, ¿pero qué dices? O sea, no tienen nada que ver, son totalmente diferentes. No hay más que hablar con los policías, los psicólogos y toda la gente que se dedica en Mindhunter a atrapar a estos asesinos para darse cuenta de lo diferentes que son, y para ellos fue muy un proceso largo. Dedicaron muchas semanas a hablar de todas estas reglas, establecerlo todo antes de ponerse a escribir.
There's more. So No intelligence. There's nothing intelligent about 99% of them. There's a rat-like cunning, but that's not the same as intelligence. There's a narcissistic, self-serving cunning to people like Ted Bundy, but that's not intelligence. It's the same with Harvey Weinstein. You know, he's got a rat-like cunning, but he's not that bright. He's quite thick. He doesn't make films. He's just an agent for. He's a buyer, you know. So we were, you know, the charming killer. There are no charming killers. Men who hunt women and then kill them, they're almost inevitably horrible, smelly, dysfunctional morons, you know. And that's the reality. So that was one of our rules.
Y otra cosa que también queríamos dejar muy clara es que no son inteligentes. Esta idea de los asesinos inteligentes, tal, no lo son. Son unos narcisistas, tanto Ted Bundy como gente como Harvey Weinstein, que pueden tener algo de agudeza mental, pero realmente no son gente inteligente. Harvey Weinstein simplemente es un señor que compraba películas y ya está, no tenía nada de inteligencia. No hay nada encantador. Los hombres que matan a mujeres son personas asquerosas, disfuncionales y no tienen absolutamente nada de encantador.
Hi, Joe. I would like to
Please, perdón, eso, gracias. Así te vemos.
I would like to ask you which are the parameters that you have in mind and you think are the most important at the time you have to pitch your idea to a producer. Which are the parameters you think that you have in mind to choose one producer or one platform instead of the other ones?
What was the question? How to choose?
How do you choose who to pitch?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. See, when you're in this business, you think it's about will they pick me, but actually you're picking them. So you've got to find the ones that you think are the most intelligent and who are making the stuff that's closest to what you want to make. And the ones that seem like they've got a good chance of getting it made. Because there are producers out there that like my dark, weird stuff, but they wouldn't really know how to raise the money and get it made. So I think with producers, you have to choose really, really, really carefully and sort of audition them, you know. I mean, I've spent the last 2 years just auditioning producers, just meeting them and quietly sussing them out and sizing them up and trying to work out whether I want to work with them or not, you know. Just sort of cruising them, grooming them a bit, you know, saving them for later if they're any good, and never speaking to them again if they're not, you know. And then when the producers that approach me, maybe 8 out of 10 or maybe 5 out of 10 are okay, 3 of them are useless, and maybe 2 of them are going to be good and interesting. But yeah, how smart are they, and do they really get your stuff, and are they making stuff like that? Do they know how to do it?
Pues a la pregunta de cómo se elige a quién presentarle la idea, comenta Joe que realmente eres tú el que estás eligiendo, que muchas veces se podría pensar que son las plataformas o las productoras las que eligen a los escritores, pero hay que andarse con mucho ojo porque hay que encontrar a los productores hay que presentarle los proyectos a gente que puede estar interesado en lo que haces, entender lo que hace, a lo que haces. Si son personas inteligentes, si tienen proyectos parecidos a los que tú ya haces y también si tienen los fondos y los medios para poder llevarlos a cabo, porque comenta él que lleva 2 años haciéndole, digamos, una especie de casting a productores para ver si quiere trabajar con ellos. Algunos le resultan interesantes y entonces se los guarda para trabajar con ellos en el futuro y con otros pues no vuelve a hablar. Y cuando son ellos los que se ponen en contacto con él, pues en la mayor parte de las veces a lo mejor hay 5 que podría ir bien, otros 3 que, bueno, ni fu ni fa, y 2 de esos que son muy buenos. Y lo importante es dar con gente que entiende bien lo que tú haces y que tienen proyectos parecidos a los que en los que tú quieres trabajar.
Also, just one quick thing.
Yes.
If they ever buy you a present, stop working with them.
Una cosa súper importante,
Never work with the ones that buy you presents.
si os compran regalos, sabéis que tenéis que alejaros totalmente de ellos. O sea, si os compran algo, no son de fiar. Nada que ver con ellos.
It shows they think you're stupid.
Eso quiere decir que creen que sois tontos.
We're running out of time, so should we ask one more question and then we wrap up? Okay,
Tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más.
just one and then yes, okay. Thank you.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm gonna cry tonight, but thank you. Okay, so I had this question. I really look up to people that write about things they're passionate about, and you just, are passionate about, true crime, which, so how can you tell when a story or some material is worth telling? What makes something a story worth telling? It also reminded me of when you were talking about how certain books that have more mystery are just like more prone to having more story material. So what is story to you, basically? Thank you.
Pregunta, ¿cómo sabes que una historia merece la pena?
Well, sort of what hasn't really been told before, something that seems unique and is asking a question or dealing with a problem that hasn't been chewed over a lot, what I liked about Mindhunter, because it was about a cop that was trying to get better educated. He was also trying to get more authority because he realized that as a young cop he didn't have much. He was also learning that the more he mined the serial killer industry, the more popular and successful he became. Those are all things that aren't done very often, but they're universal. Everybody knows what it's like to start climbing the ladder of a career and selling out. Everybody knows what it's like to be out of your depth and not really know what you're doing. Everybody knows what it's like to be seduced into doing a morally dubious thing and finding that you're good at it and it rewards you. So I just think that the mark of a great story is something that just is completely unlike a lot of the other stories that I'm reading. And with true crime, the thing about, I love lots of other things. It's just that I think crime is a way of accessing a culture. Like the way to learn about America is learn about American crime. The way to learn about Australia is to learn about Australian crime. The way to learn about Britain and Europe is to learn about their crime, because they're all distinctly different and they reveal culture. And the other thing about criminals is that they do what they're not supposed to do. So they're not putting on an act. They're not acting virtuous for, the sake of appearances. They're in the underworld. They're doing what they want to do. They're doing what their impulse is. And very often what they want to do and what their impulse is the same as society's. Greed, selfishness, hedonism, corruption, easiness. And crime is just inherently dramatic anyway. But it does sort of answer a lot of things for me, a lot of criteria for me.
Pues principalmente lo que me interesa es que sea una historia que no se ha contado antes, que sea una idea única, original. Si plantea un problema que no está tremendamente machacado ya. Y lo que me gustaba de Mindhunter era que era un policía que quería formarse, quería educarse, quería tener más autoridad y aprender sobre los asesinos en serie. Pues fue algo que le hizo como más popular. Estos son temas que no son comunes, pero son universales. Todos nos hemos encontrado en situaciones en las que nos hemos visto teniendo que hacer cosas para las que no estamos preparados. Nos hemos dejado seducir por algo moralmente dudoso y hemos visto que daba nos salía bien y se nos daba bien. Y realmente es eso, es una buena historia, es la que no se parece a las demás. Y en cuanto al género del true crime, es que lo que me fascina del crimen es que es una forma de acceder a otras culturas, para entender Estados Unidos, Australia, Europa. Lo interesante es estudiar el crimen, que nos revela muchísimas cosas. Los criminales se mueven por impulsos que suelen ser los mismos de la sociedad, el egoísmo, la avaricia, la corrupción, y simplemente son formas de ayudarnos a entender otras culturas.
So we're wrapping up. The last piece of advice to say goodbye for now to our lovely audience.
Well, I think I've... Do you want to say...
Ya vamos a terminar y entonces por último vamos a cerrar con el último consejo de Joy para vosotros.
I've sort of answered in bits and pieces, but I think the best advice is to be a sponge, you know, and soak up as much as you can and listen to as much as you can and store it in your head, because your head is like a warehouse. And the more stuff you've got up there and the more answers you've got, the better you'll do and the more you've got to offer.
Ya he ido contestando un poco con mis otras respuestas, pero principalmente os diría que tenéis que ser como esponjas. Escuchéis a todo el mundo, que sepáis identificar bien las cosas que os dicen y escuchéis bien los consejos. Vuestra cabeza es, digamos, como si fuera un almacén. Cuanta más información tengáis, más vais a poder aprovecharlo.
Bueno, con esto cerramos el encuentro de hoy. Quiero volver a agradecerle a la gente de Serielizados que nos trajo este lujo que es tener a Joe Penhall aquí hoy. Y muchas gracias a ustedes por las maravillosas preguntas que nos hicieron y que realmente nos hicieron el gran día. Gracias a todos. Con esto cerramos.
Thank you.